It is therefore in the national interest to fight for these employees to enable the sector to grow in spite of the American tariffs. This is why our government is making historic investments in the sector. We invested in manufacturing electric cars and batteries. We also established partnerships with the provinces, the unions, and car manufacturers, and we have assisted businesses in modernizing, innovating, and preparing for the future.
Invest in Canada. If you create good jobs here, our government will be your strongest partner. But if you make promises and then walk away, you will be held accountable. We've shown that before. In trade disputes, we didn't back down. We fought for our workers with fairness, with strengths, and with results. And we went even further. We've launched the Strategic Response Fund, a $5 billion investment fund to help industries like the auto sector to adapt, to retool, and stay competitive. Because we're just not reacting. We're planning the future of employment in Canada. What is happening to the Stellantis workers in Brampton is a fight worth fighting for. It is bigger than one company or one city. It is about fairness, accountability, solidarity. It's about keeping promises. It's about standing together, not only when times are good, but also when times are tough. What we need now is national unity. No divisions, no political games. Workers' livelihoods are not pawns in a partisan strategy. These are our lives, families, entire communities. So let's work together. I'm already doing that with the government of Ontario and Unifor. And we can do that together. Nous devons travailler ensemble. We
have to work together at all levels of government, all parties, all regions of the country to defend Canadian workers. That is what people in the country expect of us, and this is what we will deliver to them. We're always there for our workers, and we will always be there with Brampton. And we will not let ourselves be distracted by political games when jobs are at stake.
And to auto workers across this country, know this. We see you, we hear you, and we're with you. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Après vous.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, thank you, Minister. So, colleagues, we will start with the questions.
We'll have 6 minutes each for the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the Bloc. We'll begin with Madame Dancho. The floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister Joly, for being with us today. Of course, we have a copy of the redacted contract of the Special Contribution Agreement of up to $15 billion taxpayer dollars and the Strategic Innovation Fund, which represents a $500 million contribution from your government. Of course, to Stellantis for the Nexstar EV battery plant, as you know, courtesy of CBC last week. So now we have a situation where 3,000 people have been laid off in the Brampton facility, as you know, and you've responded to say that you're going to sue them, that they've broken their promises. And just today you've announced that you're starting the formal dispute resolution. So I'm trying to understand what exactly the promise is that you're saying they broke, assuming that that means that they broke a promise they signed in the contract. So can you tell the committee where in this agreement, courtesy of CBC, is that Canada-wide jobs guarantee? What clause?
Well, first of all, when it comes to the different, so I think we should be clear, there are 3 different contracts. This committee will have access to it. The government is acting in good faith. I want to make sure that everybody is aware of these contracts and will be able to have access to it. So it's not a courtesy of CBC or not. The government has already accepted the production
of
that's
the contract. The first that I'm able to see it. So is it in that contract or is it in another CIF agreement?
So obviously you'll see in the contract that all the contracts are linked. And clearly, it is about protecting jobs. It is about also the production at the Brampton facility. So you'll see that clearly. So, by the way, I must say, Raquel, because I think your question is really an important one, this committee, although it's not necessarily the same members, but this committee got access to contracts for the Nexstar facility 2 years ago. So that's why the government has never been clearer that you can obviously have access to it.
Those are read in confidence. We do know they're going to OGO, and now CBC has released it. So this is the first access we've been able to publicly see the contract. And again, I'll just say as an aside, this is, of course, a professional setting, Minister, so I'm extending a professional courtesy to you to refer to you as Minister Joly. I would appreciate that same courtesy to me in this setting. Thank you. So in this contract, though, there is no jobs guarantee other than the 2,500 at the Nexstar plant. So are you saying that the other SIF agreement that was for retooling Brampton and Windsor, does that contain a Brampton jobs guarantee?
So I must dispute what you just said. This is not a fact. There's always job numbers guarantees. That's exactly why the government of Canada and also the government of Ontario in this case have decided to support the company. Because at the end of the day, why do we do this? MP Dancho, we do that because we believe that it's important to create jobs, to protect jobs and create jobs.
Minister,
so you will have access to the information. You will see in the contract that there are job numbers.
Thank you.
And of course, there are things that are commercially sensitive, but the government will be acting in good faith.
But in the contract that we were provided from CBC publicly, there is a jobs commitment to the Nexstar plant. There is no mention of Brampton. So I'm asking you, in the contract we have not been able to see for Brampton, is there a jobs guarantee for Brampton?
There are jobs guarantees in all the different contracts, but I must say also that you absolutely need to make sure that you see not only the contract that is linked to the investment through the Strategic Innovation Fund for the Windsor and Brampton facility, but also its amendment. And we'll make sure that that's the case.
So you're saying that the Nexstar, the two contracts you've provided to them that total well over $15 billion, that you're tying that contract being paid out to the other SIF agreement for the Brampton and Windsor retooling. Is that correct? Because they're in violation of a Brampton.
The three contracts are linked. There's a
right,
contract and an amendment.
14.1G.
So,
yeah.
A couple of things. And maybe, Charles, if you want to be able to address the question by MP Dancho. But just before I pass it to Charles, it is really important to understand that in the contract, when you refer to $15 billion, the $15 billion was linked to the production and sale of batteries. So when you look at Windsor right now, and obviously your colleague would know because she's from the riding, the facility has been built, but the company is still hiring. And there's not been any production and sale of batteries yet. So the government has not spent $15 billion. So I know that some colleagues have been using the term $15 billion, but it's not accurate.
Up to $15 billion, though. It's
not been spent yet by the government, and that's an important fact.
What you're saying, though, is that because those 3,000 jobs at Brampton were laid off, they're in violation of their agreements. Fair enough. Now, you're saying that there is a Brampton jobs guarantee in that other SIF agreement that no one in the media or ourselves has seen. That's going to OGO. We welcome that opportunity to see that. But you're saying there's a jobs guarantee in there that will link it to the Nexstar battery plant. Is that correct?
It's actually linked to the fact that the Brampton facility must be operating, and there is not a possibility. If the Brampton facility ceases its production, there will be a violation of the contract.
And that's going to impact your agreements with the Nexstar plant. Is that correct?
And that's why we're actually starting today with the mechanism of dispute settlement, because it is important that we be able to hold the company to account.
Prepared
but I just, MP Dancho, maybe Charles, you want to add something?
Sure. Thank you very much. I guess what I would just highlight in all the agreements under the Strategic Innovation Fund, there are regular commitments around jobs, around the maintenance of activity, and so those are the types of economic
Just with my
activity.
remaining 10 seconds, so are you prepared to pull back some of this up to $15 billion and the other funding from Nexstar if they don't properly equip with the 3,000 workers in Brampton? Do you understand what I'm saying? Are you prepared to make that commitment? You're going to roll back some Nexstar funding?
Well, we'll make sure that basically we continue to uphold them to the funding that they're liable for, period.
I'm out of time.
Thank you, Madame Dancho. Madame O'Rourke, floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Carr. Minister, again, so you told us some background and some next steps. But ultimately, what is it that you want Canadian auto workers and the auto sector to know about the government's firm response to Stellantis on the failure to meet their obligations, and about how the government is supporting all auto workers and the auto sector, and just why it's such a vital part of Canada's economy?
Well, thank you, Dominic. I think it's important for the auto workers to understand that we know that there's anxiety out there. We know that they're dealing with unfair tariffs against the auto industry of 25%. We know that we are at a pivotal moment that we need to fight for every single job. And that's why the decision by Stellantis to move production of the Jeep Compass from Brampton to Illinois was completely unacceptable, because it was not only against the legal obligations that were binding towards the government of Canada, it was also happening at a time where there are negotiations ongoing. And we thought it was completely unacceptable that that decision was taken. And that decision was so important for the rest of the auto sector. And so that's why it is not time to do politics. We need to act as one Canadian team, because it's the future of the auto sector that is at stake. And that is why I've been in contact with all the CEOs of all the different Canadian companies here. That's why I've been in contact also with the labor unions. That's why I'm on speed dial with Vic Fedeli, the Minister of Economic Development of Ontario, because it's the very backbone of the Ontario economy that is at stake. And if we don't fight for all these jobs and for all for the auto industry, it will have an impact, yes, on Ontario. But as a Quebecer, I very much understand that it will have an impact on the rest of the country. And so, it is not usual for the Minister of Industry to be working so closely with the labor movement, such as Unifor. Because my job is technically to be working with the private sector and to be there to defend their interests. But now our interests are completely aligned, because not only am I fighting and we're fighting for the Brampton workers, but we're fighting for the auto parts companies in the sector. We're fighting for all the SMEs, for all the supply chain. It's the future of the auto sector that is at stake. So that's the position of the government, and you can count on me to make sure that we fight for these jobs.
Thank you, Minister. Just speaking of the jobs, certainly in the contract that we have regarding Next Gen, can you help us understand that the job creation numbers are actually much broader than that? So those are the end game jobs. But in a contract like that, what does the R&D look like? The construction of these massive factories look like? The partnership with SME? So these are sound investments that the government makes in terms of job creation, and clearly an important investment in EV batteries. So can you just give us a big picture of what the full build-out really should look like?
Well, our goal is to make sure that we attract investment to the country. It's foreign direct investment, so we're in a global fight to attract these jobs. It's not only, the government of Canada working with the government of Ontario. We're also going against what the U.S. is trying to do, what Europe is trying to do, what other jurisdictions around the world that are willing to put a lot of money on the table to attract these companies. And meanwhile, the benefits are really important. Last week, what we announced was the 3,000 jobs at the St. Thomas facility for Volkswagen. And we've been working a lot on that, because obviously it's an important moment for St. Thomas. And I think there's an important MP from the Conservatives that is benefiting from all these jobs because it's in his writing. It's MP Andrew Lawton. But, on CTV, the mayor of St. Thomas just mentioned that he hadn't stopped smiling for now days and weeks, because the 3,000 direct jobs were really good news, and even in the context of the trade war. And Volkswagen will be using Canadian steel, and will be using also, obviously, things that are so much impacted because they're linked to tariff sectors that are impacted these days. So it is indeed the 3,000 jobs in St. Thomas, but then it's all the indirect jobs that are in St. Thomas and having an impact. And that's up to 9,000 jobs. So it's an entire supply chain that it benefits from it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Fantastic. So, Minister, opposition parties in the previous meeting, they're trying to make this about EVs, but the Government of Ontario also provided investments to support Stellantis and other automakers. So does this mean that regardless of partisan opinion, it's definitely a strategic investment at this time and remains so. And why are these investments still so critical for Canada?
Yeah, well, they are important because they're creating jobs. And the job of the Minister of Industry is to, in these times, is first to protect jobs, particularly in the tariff sectors, including the auto sector, and also to create jobs in the sector, notwithstanding the fact that it's under a lot of pressure because of the trade tensions. So I think that when you look at where the global industry is at, the global industry is definitely towards electrification. That's just a fact. And so I want to make sure that as a government, we position the Canadian sector at the forefront of innovation and at the forefront of the consumer demand and also where the market is going. So I'm trying to be very pragmatic and to make sure ultimately that the investments make sense, and that's what we're doing.
Merci, Madame O'Rourke. Monsieur Saint-Marie.
Thank you, Ms. O'Rourke. 6 minutes now, Mr. Saint-Marie. Thank you, Chair. Minister, ladies and gentlemen, deputy ministers, thank you for being here. Melanie, I have a lot of questions about Stellantis, but before I would like us to talk about what's happening at PACCAR. Can you give us an idea what's going on there, and are there encouraging news on that afterwards? Yes, certainly. So, of course, what went on PACCAR is completely unacceptable. Once again, the unjustified tariffs from the U.S. that are causing an impact. We've worked with the company, the union, and the Quebec government. I also talked with the executive director of PACCAR and with Steve Anctil, the plant manager, and I had previously visited the plant in Sainte Thérèse, and to me it was important for us to protect jobs. I know that your colleagues are talking a lot now. It's a bit irritating, Chair. Yes.
Because it's happening in some different areas. We've got people that are trying to listen, and if you have conversations, which I can appreciate, sometimes need to take place. If we can do that outside, please. Appreciate that. Thank you. I've stopped the clock. Monsieur Saint-Marie, Ministre, continue.
Please continue, Minister.
On a travaillé avec la compagnie.
So we worked with the company. We also worked with the Quebec government. I spoke to Christine Fréchette several times over the last couple of weeks, and again yesterday on this issue. And also, I met with the union leadership of PACCAR, and I think that seeing as PACCAR is the only plant that builds or assembles actually heavy vehicles in Canada, and so our objective with our policy of Buy Canadian will be to help companies such as PACCAR at a time when Canada is going to be making substantial purchases. And I also hope this will be the case for the Quebec government that has a lot of ties with Hydro-Quebec, SAQ, and so on, and the government of Ontario and other governments, so that we can support our jobs across the country. And we'll be happy to work with you. Do we expect a reopening in the short term? As long as the American tariffs are maintained? What I understood from the company is that each time they increase 10 trucks per day, they can add 100 jobs. So it's going to be why Canadian purchasing will have a lot of impact. It's about a 34,000 truck project that they can have access to, but it will rely a lot on supply and government contracts. So the more we can work with them on this issue, the more we'll be able to bring jobs. And that's why I also had conversations with Joël Legban, the Minister of Procurement. So we hope that the Canadian government will contribute to the purchasing of trucks and heavy vehicles built there. Yourself or the government, have you looked into the possibility of providing a targeted wage subsidy for those lost jobs so that the link can be maintained with those jobs? Because we know that the tariffs will not stay at those levels eternally. So we need plants such as PACCAR in Quebec. We offered to the company, in fact, all the companies affected by tariffs that have problems of liquidity, actually the sharing of employment insurance, premiums, to increase the compensation. And in short, we have a lot of flexibility, and we encourage companies to use that program. It's called the work share program. But at the same time, we've changed the rules of eligibility for employment insurance to make it so that workers have access to it more quickly. But Gabrielle, my objective is not to have people on employment insurance. My goal is to have them keep their jobs. I've heard stories around Packard where a couple, they're both working in Packard, they're both affected, both are losing their jobs. It's not by turning to employment insurance that they'll be able to pay their mortgage. So that's why I'm acting on an emergency basis, and a feeling of urgency, working with the provinces, including Quebec, so that we can act quickly to ensure that they can have access to contracts that have that plant so that we can bring back their jobs. Because once the company informs you as an employee that you've lost your job, you're not going to wait around to see if the company will call you back. You'll move or try to find a job somewhere else. But that also affects the fact that you have skills in a given sector that are very, very specific. And it's not always easy to use those skills in that region. So there may be Nova Bus, for example, or other companies in the region that could need those skills. But 10% of tariffs have been imposed on buses also. So we can see that it has an impact across the entire ecosystem, not only in Ontario, but in Quebec. This is my point precisely in this speech. Thank you for the answer. Hence the idea of the wage subsidy to maintain expertise. Concerning the automobile sector in general, do you and the government fear that if the tariffs are maintained long-term, that there will be a deindustrialization as we saw in Detroit? Well, I don't want to go into catastrophic scenarios, but our goal now is to counteract any form of those possibilities. So essentially, my goal is going to be to fight for those jobs, because I'm very much aware that the government has levers. We're not without means. And the automobile market in Canada is 2 million automobiles. It's a very substantial market, especially for American builders who do not necessarily have foreign markets that are as important. So to me, it's going to be to put pressure by working with provincial governments, by working with the unions, because I think that it'll make a difference. And as I said clearly to the CEOs, there is going to be political pressure, and my goal is to increase it, and I'll be pleased to work with the Bloc Québécois on that issue. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Sainte-Marie. Ms. Dancho, you have 5 minutes.
An issue again, it's 3,000 jobs, as you've said, and you've linked the contract, the SIF retooling with Brampton and Windsor to the Next Star plants. So I need to understand, though, you mentioned there was a production guarantee for the Brampton SIF agreement, but you did not specify an employment guarantee number. So was it 3,000 jobs that SIF agreement with Brampton guaranteed?
So I will provide that information through you because obviously they're commercially sensitive information. So I just need to check.
If I may just interrupt for a moment.
I don't want to be interrupted, Mr. Chair. I just want to be able to finish my sentence, please.
Minister, MP Dancho.
If I may.
Yeah, here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
When we ask the minister to appear, we want the minister to have an opportunity to have answers. We want members to have an opportunity to have questions. I'm not going to hold the time of her response against your time.
What about this time?
Okay, this time the clock is paused, so you're okay. Minister, I'll let you finish the response. Madame Dancho, I'll ask to let her complete, and then Minister, I'll ask you to let her complete. I'm not going to hold the clock hostage here. So Minister, finish, and then MP Dancho.
I think it's important when you look at the different contracts that first and foremost, particularly on the battery front, the contract is 1/3 the government of Ontario and 2/3 the government of Canada. So it's not $15 billion. I know that the MP has referred to $15 billion for the government of Canada.
Because this isn't what I asked you specifically.
But to go specifically on the job numbers, we'll look at what is possible to make public because of commercially sensitive
If
information.
I may on that specific
but
point,
I
please.
just want to
If I
finish
may
my
on that
answer.
specific point,
and
please, if you'll
therefore
allow me,
we will
Minister.
be
It is
able
my
to
time,
answer
so
your
I'm just going to have
question.
to respond. So on the commercially sensitive redactions, now on the SIF agreement for Nexstar, the jobs guarantee of 2,500 was not redacted, so it stands to reason that it wouldn't be redacted, wouldn't be commercially sensitive under a different SIF agreement. Surely you can tell us if there was a 3,000 person jobs guarantee for Brampton, and that's not commercially sensitive information. So it is concerning to me that you're not committing that there was a jobs guarantee for the Brampton
that's
facility.
not what I'm saying.
So you're
What
saying that there is...
I'm saying that all the plants were linked and all the contracts are linked. So you will be able to see it when we will be producing.
But if there
the
wasn't
cover.
a jobs guarantee of 3,000 people at Brampton, which is the whole reason you're here, then how is it that you're tying all of the money to a jobs guarantee that may or may not exist? You should be able to tell us if there is a jobs guarantee for the 3,000 jobs in
I
Brampton.
think you're falling into the trap of trying to find a problem where there's none.
Well, the problem is that
Because
3,000 people were laid
what
off,
the government
and your
was
government
trying to
committed
do-
thousands, millions, and billions, in fact, of dollars.
Well, MP
and we're
Dancho, I
trying
don't
to
know whether
understand
you
if
want this to be a
there's-
monologue or you want me to
but
appear.
the
Because
question
if you
I'm
want
asking
this
you
to
is
be a
very
monologue,
clear.
So,
I
colleagues-
don't need to be here.
Colleagues, I'm going to pause us again for a moment. I do want to ensure that we've got an opportunity for dialogue. I think that's the ultimate goal here. Minister, if you can give us maybe 30 seconds in your
Okay.
reply, MP Dancho will go back to you, and then I believe you were hoping to split the time with Mr. Seaback,
Hopefully.
of which there would be about 3 minutes or so left. Minister, if you want to give us about a 30-second answer here.
Yeah, well, ultimately, the goal was to create jobs. And so obviously there were job numbers, and obviously it was linked to the fact that we needed to protect the Brampton facility. I was not negotiating at the time, but this is clear through the very evaluation and just the fact that just reading the contracts. When you see that there are contracts that are linked to investing in the Windsor plant that are linked to the Brampton facility, or investing in the Windsor Nexstar LG, basically Stellantis LG contract linked to the Brampton facility. So clearly it was to protect the jobs. And so that was the
she's
position
cutting
of the government.
If I may, so again, what we're trying to dig down is if your government instituted a clause in one of these three agreements that guaranteed the broader Stellantis footprint in Canada, including the 3,000 jobs that were just laid off. You know this. So what I'm trying to drill down is if there was something in the contracts, there isn't one in here. Brampton is even mentioned in the contract for the Nexstar agreement. I understand they can be linked. There is a clause 14.1G that may link it to the Brampton facility. But you're not committing whether there was a clear jobs guarantee there. So your argument is, oh, no, we're covered. We're suing them in clear grounds. But you're not telling us, in fact, if there was 3,000 jobs guaranteed in that SIF agreement. So that's the real question I have, because there is significant commitments, as you know, up to $15 billion in partnership with Ontario. We have also another $1 billion of capital investment as well for the retooling of Brampton and Windsor under the SIF agreement. I'm trying to nail down if there's a jobs requirement for Brampton. A further $500 million in this SIF agreement for the Nexstar. We're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars. And from our estimation and the historic investment that your government has made, surely there should be an explicit Canada-wide jobs guarantee. But we're splitting hairs here. You're kind of being quite evasive of the numbers, whether there's a real guarantee. It should be explicit if you're going to give a historic amount of taxpayer funding. In fact, just to wrap up, Mr. Chair, I will just say this. I'm not sure if you understand the magnitude of the money that you've committed, but I did some math. And the number of two-parent, full-time working households that had to work for your government to provide just its
So since you
contribution
interrupted
to
me before,
Stellantis
I would like
is over
to-
647,000 Canadian families had to work an entire year for your government to provide up to $11 billion. And there is no explicit jobs guarantee in anywhere
not
here.
true.
So
you're putting
it's just
you're putting
quite
words
disappointing,
into
but
my
you're not
mouth,
giving
which
a
I don't
commitment of
agree.
whether there's a 3,000
And also, you're not
So,
being true
colleagues,
to
I
the
think
contract.
You're not
because
giving
the
that commitment.
contract is
What's gonna
until
happen-
2032. So math doesn't
there isn't
work.
So,
there
Minister-
isn't well,
And
Minister-
that's how many
Dancho, stop doing
taxpayers had to pay
politics. The
to
goal
fund this
right now
agreement.
is to
That is a
protect
fact.
the
colleagues,
workers.
Enough.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to be generous here. Mr. Seaback, I'm going to give you the opportunity because I believe that MP Dancho was hoping to share some time with you. There is not time left. I'm going to be generous, provide you the opportunity for a question.
Oh, thank
and
you.
I ask that you allow the minister to respond in full to
Absolutely.
that question, and then we're going to continue. Okay?
Great. Minister, I know you're aware that Oshawa lost a shift, 700 jobs. They went to the United States for production there. Oshawa plant makes light-duty trucks and heavy-duty trucks. Are you aware that GM is now retooling an abandoned EV plant in Orion, Michigan, to manufacture light-duty trucks starting Q1 2027? And I spoke to Unifor Auto Workers this morning about this. So they want to know from you, will you guarantee today that they will not lose their jobs and have those jobs be transferred to the United States, just like what happened at the Brampton Stellantis plant? Will you guarantee it today?
So, Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, I think that this was about Stellantis. I will answer, of course, discussions linked to GM. When it comes to Oshawa, the third shift is here until January, and we're fighting for it. And we're having conversation with Stellantis to make sure that we're able to keep it, and to keep the production in St. Catharines, and to keep and bring back also a production to Ingersoll. And I will continue to push, because I think that is completely unacceptable what is going at GM. That being said, I think that what is happening at GM and what is happening at Stellantis are two different decisions, because there was a clear commitment on the part of Stellantis before the Canadian government to make sure that there would be a facility that would be working with the Jeep Compass at Stellantis in Brampton. When it comes to also the third shift, we'll continue to make sure that we put pressure on GM. I will be having conversation with Mayor Barra. Unifor has been having conversations also with GM, and we will be united, because I've met also with the Oshawa people. I've met with the Oshawa Auto Workers. I've met also with Unifor, and I'll make sure that they can keep their jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Seaback.
Appel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Oui, allez-y, Monsieur Seaback.
Point of order, Chair. I'd just like to remind the colleagues that when there are several people speaking at the same time, it makes it very difficult for the interpreters, and it can cause even injuries. So a little reminder about that. Thank you, Chair. I agree. Thank you, sir.
There was quite an involved exchange, which involved some of the crosstalk that Monsieur Saint-Marie mentioned. So I was wondering if the minister wanted to conclude any remarks that she hadn't had the chance to make with respect to Stellantis in that earlier exchange.
So colleagues, I think we're starting to get off track a little bit here. So let's get back to the reason why we're here, which is to ask the minister questions. Madame Akan, you have the floor for 5 minutes, and I hope that we can keep ourselves on track a little better than we did in the last round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for appearing here today. So we are studying how we can continue to defend the interest of Canadian workers and strengthen our auto industry. And that's why I'll focus on my questions about investments and the value chain. So when we talk about the auto sector today, we have to think beyond the final assembly line, and we have to look at the entire vehicle value chain, from mining and refining of critical minerals to component manufacturing, battery production, and final vehicle assembly. So Canada is uniquely positioned to connect every part of the value chain through partnerships with industry, labor, and the government, who are working together to keep production and innovation here in Canada. So I would like to highlight that in my riding of Oakville West, we are already seeing this value chain taking shape. Last year, Dana Canada Corporation received about $3 million in federal funding through adjourned, Canada's global innovation cluster for advanced manufacturing, which is supported by IZ. So this funding will help Dana to modernize its manufacturing and design better cooling technology for electric vehicles and improving battery performance and efficiency. So could you please talk us about recent investments in the sector, particularly in EV? How do investments like this one made in Dana, Canada, fit into Canada's broader plan to build complete EV value chain and position Canada in the North America's EV supply chain for decades to come, and also help us to stay competitive?
Thank you. Well, when you look at the global industry in general, we know that there's been a leapfrogging, because we know that other countries, particularly in Asia, have been able to come up with vehicles that are affordable with new technology. And we know that these different vehicles are now being sold around the world. Now, the North American market has been much more linked to basically exporting within NAFTA territory, so Canada, US, Mexico. And we made sure throughout the last negotiations that we would be protecting our market. Now, what we saw is at the time we needed to invest more in the EV sector because that's where the global demand was going, but also that was in reaction to what President Biden was doing with his own Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. And we made big investments at the time because it was in line with what other jurisdictions were doing. And we also had an advantage that many other jurisdictions didn't have. We had access to green, affordable electricity. And that is why we were able, working with the government of Ontario, to attract investments in the EV sector, including also, obviously, in your riding of Oakville. And it was not only to bring the big Windsor plant, which is Stellantis LG, which is called Nexstar. It was not only St. Thomas and Volkswagen, but it was also linked to investments in Bécancour, Quebec, and it was having an impacts across the supply chain for small and medium-sized businesses. So it was a strategy that made sense. Now, 25% tariffs against Canadian vehicles is really, really hurting, obviously. But not only that, the end of the Inflation Reduction Act had an impact on the auto sector. And what we're coping with right now is the industry at the world level that is going much more towards EVs. And meanwhile, the North American market that is not necessarily at the same pace. And so that is why also we paused the EV mandates. I'm convinced I would get questions on that because we wanted to be pragmatic. And that's why we're trying to do two things right now: to protect the jobs that are under threat and create new ones, and at the same time, be at the forefront of the competitivity of our sector, knowing that we have lots of really great resources from everything that is linked to the components of the batteries because of the rare earths and the critical minerals, up to being able to have access to affordable green electricity to create them and assemble the vehicles. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to not be ideological, but to be pragmatic, to support the jobs that are done at Honda and Toyota, which, by the way, is 70% of our production in our country, while making sure that I can continue to retain the jobs from the D3, the Stellantis, Ford, and GM. So that's what I'm doing right now, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you so much, Minister. So based on the value chain again, Dana is a very good example, and they're partnering with KA Imaging in Waterloo on this project, on their modernizing. So that kind of cross-regional collaboration between Oakville's manufacturing base and Waterloo's tech sector really reflects Canada's innovation ecosystem. So would you agree that the projects like this show how federal innovation programs are reaching every part of the country, not just the big automakers, but the suppliers, also the technology leaders that make the whole system work? And what is Ontario government reaction to those moves?
I was at
Please, Minister.
Thursday. So we know when it comes to the companies in Canada, we're very strong with auto parts companies also. So we have global companies, Linamar, Martin Ria, Magna, that are huge companies that have a significant footprint in across the GTA, across southwestern Ontario, but also across the U.S. and Mexico, and also elsewhere in Europe. So we will work with them, but we very much know that they support also other small companies. So that's why when I think about what's going on in the sector and this Brampton Stellantis problem, I know that if we don't fight that battle and if we don't win it, the sector is at stake. And so that's why I'm putting maximum pressure. I can't be more, clear about this.
Merci, Madame Akan. Monsieur Saint-Marie.
Thank you, Ms. Akan. Mr. Saint-Marie, 2 minutes and a half. Yes, 2 questions, one after the other. First of all, when large employers expect larger job losses, they advise the minister and the government so that the employment insurance plan can be involved. Was that done? And right away, my second question is, Stellantis is saying that they have another project for Brampton. Have they presented that to you? Is it acceptable or is it still not done? And are you still fighting to get the Jeep Compass back? Thank you. We had a call with the president of Stellantis Canada, not even 24 hours before. For my part, I received a call from the president of Stellantis Canada less than 24 hours before the announcement, and that in itself was a problem. And so at the time, my response was hypodermic. So the first point. The second point, because we were placed before a fait accompli. So even though the contracts were clear, and we had already said to the various car manufacturers, that we were going to be able to help them get through the crisis. Because you have to understand that right now, tariffs can have a substantial impact on the cost of sales connected with the building of automobiles in Canada, most of which are exported to the United States. So we had already, and I had already had those conversations with the presidents of the different Canadian automobile manufacturers to tell them that we have a fund to help the automobile sector. We'll put money on the table and we'll help you get through this crisis. And that's why my response was really very strong, because they made that decision without necessarily consulting the government of Canada and without even looking at the options that were available and that were already on the table. Time is going quickly. I just have 2.5 minutes. So regarding the Jeep Compass, where did they present another plan for another option for Brampton? They still haven't. That's the problem. So starting as of today, we're launching the process of conflict resolution or dispute resolution under the contract, because we're giving them 30 days to get back to us with a plan in order to bring back the production to Brampton. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Saint-Marie, there was 90 seconds left. I thought you were trying to find some extra, but thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be splitting my time with MP Borelli. Minister, you claim that there's a section and a clause in the contract that can point specifically to a violation Stellantis has made. So has the Government of Canada, their lawyers, contacted Stellantis and invoked that clause?
That's what we're doing today. That's exactly the letter that we're sending today.
So today you're invoking a clause in a contract. What section and what specific clause will you be invoking?
So you don't have access, I gather, to the contract that is linked to the CIF agreement, which is, bureaucrat words, the Strategic Innovation, public servant words, Strategic Innovation Fund. And that is linked to the Strategic Innovation Fund support for Windsor and Brampton. And there's an amendment also to that contract.
So, Minister, I heard you mention the federal EV mandates, and we've had some auto executives here at this committee who said, you know, the pause doesn't create the certainty that the industry requires. And really the one very simple and easy thing the government could do to breathe some life into the sector would be to remove these EV mandates. So given all the pressures on the auto sector from trade negotiations and the latter, should or will you commit today to eliminating the EV mandate?
So my goal is to make sure that when it comes to the future of the sector, that the production in Canada is protected. And actually that there are incentives for them to continue to even more produce in Canada. So that's why I've had the conversation with Honda and Toyota, who have both have non-plug-ins hybrids. I'm willing to have conversations with them. I'm willing to do things to protect the jobs in Alston, to make sure that the Toyota and Honda
One last quick
plants
question, because my time is very limited. In the Strategic Innovation Fund agreement, there's very detailed enforceable reporting on gender equality, diversity, and climate initiatives. Goes as far as saying there's a 50-30 challenge where the board's made up of 50% women and non-binary people, 30% are racialized, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities, First Nations, Métis. Why are the most detailed commitments in the agreement net zero and DEI and not jobs guarantees for Brampton?
Are you against women being on boards?
No, I would say I'm for 100%.
Just answer the question.
That's not what I said, first of all, but also I'd be for 100% female boards. It should be merit-based. But the question is, why is there no reference to keeping jobs at Stellantis and so much emphasis on these policies?
But I don't know why you're all saying that there's no commitment. There is. So, just look at the contracts and then you'll be informed.
Which section?
It's going to be in the production of the contract on the SIF agreement for Windsor and Brampton, period, and the amendment.
Jump in, Kathy.
And I must say, we're acting in good faith. We're not on the different teams here. We all want the same thing. And the same thing is to bring back production at Brampton.
Minister, billions of dollars of taxpayer money was poured into a single foreign-owned company, Stellantis. Taxpayers want to know, and they deserve to know, where their money is being used. They deserve to know if that money will lead to good-paying jobs for Canadians. What actions will you take if you do not receive a plan from Stellantis? Within the contracts of Stellantis, if there was a default, then they must pay the money back. Mm-hmm. Will you commit to ensuring Stellantis pays back the billions of taxpayer dollars your government handed out?
Well, that's what we're doing today. We're launching that process. But I just want to understand, you're from Windsor, right?
Yes, that's correct, Ms.
So I guess people in Windsor are happy with the investments of the battery plant, because as of now, there's 1,000 new jobs that were created, and it's growing to 2,500 jobs. So I just want to make sure that the narrative coming from the Conservative team here is consequential. Do you
Minister,
agree with the investments in the EV battery plant or not?
Sure we do. I just want to make sure that those jobs are secured. So
Absolutely.
Will you commit to making sure of that for us? And will you commit to ensuring Stellantis pays back the money that we've given them if they don't continue to employ people at the Brampton plant?
Kathy, we're on board. We both agree.
Well, I don't see a definite plan. It always seems like the Liberals are pouring money out without a plan, and we don't often see the results that we need.
Listen, that's easy to say. I'm sorry, but I don't know why we're playing politics here. We're in a global competition to attract investments. We were able to get an investment from Stellantis, which is a joint venture between a Korean company, and Nexstar, which is a joint venture between LG and Stellantis, in creating 2,500 jobs in year writing in the wonderful city of Windsor that I look forward going to very soon. This was a pivotal moment for the community. I understand there's a lot of anxiety. I understand that people in the sector are scared of losing their jobs. But at the time where there is a pressure against the sector, having new investments is fundamental. So we should work together to make sure that we're fighting for the jobs at Brampton, but keeping the jobs and creating new ones in Windsor. Okay. And I don't know why there is a competition between both. I think we can do both.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Ms. Borelli. That's time. Monsieur Nutsumba, à vous pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Newbank, to you for 5 minutes, and welcome. Welcome. Thank you, Ms. Joly. Good news as well. I think we can see the situation better as it can contribute to our optimistic side of things in Quebec. 3,000 new jobs in Saint-Omer, 1,000 new jobs in Windsor. It's all connected with the supply chain around the entire country. There's Ontario, there's also Quebec, which is involved. Can you develop more on the impacts of the new jobs? Of course, we have good jobs because these are jobs which are, in addition, protected by and are unionized, where there have been collective agreements that were negotiated to the advantage of the employer and of the employees. So there's a labor peace, substantial peace, resulting in foreseeability on the business model. And essentially, how could I say that, a longer lasting situation, at least for St. Thomas as well as for Windsor. So Windsor, it's not 1,000, it's actually 2,500 jobs. 1,000 have just been created. So this is good news. But as you know, the challenge we have right now is that although there's so much geopolitical tension and we're living in a much more complex world and more dangerous, is to attract investment. It's not easy. We have to be able to provide a number of guarantees to businesses that are looking to invest in the USA, in Mexico, or elsewhere in Europe, in Asia. So the Canadian government, what do we have? What levers do we have? It's really economic development levers in order to find ways to reduce the risk to businesses and hence to be able to offer them funds, subsidies, and production incentives. And what we're looking at in the Stellantis issue is that the government was very much aware that we needed to find some way to be able to provide that funding to manage the risks while protecting the jobs, because we knew that we're negotiating on good times, but that there could also be bad times, and that's what we did. And that's what we have to continue to do. And that's why you will see in tomorrow's budget, we're going to be there for, of course, to protect jobs, to build, and also to make sure that we give people more power to be able to get access to good jobs and prosperity for their families. Thank you. You also talked in your introductory remarks, in one of your answers, about investment in electric vehicles. Yes. Is it still possible to clarify more on that? Yes, Gabrielle asked the question, and Olivier, I'm glad you asked it, but there's a tie between Quebec and Ontario on that, because there's a lot of investment from the Quebec government as well in the sector, in the battery sector. Some investments were not necessarily as positive as they could have been for the Quebec government. We were not very strongly affected by that because each time we connect our subsidy with the fact that there would be the production and sales of batteries involved. But what I think is that even if we think about industrial strategies, and this is more my colleagues and my officials that can say this, and myself at the political level, but you have to think in the long term. You have to have vision, and you have to be able to get through political storms, as is the case now. So we have that vision. We're going to continue taking actions in this way and continue to move forward, and we'll make the necessary investments. Earlier, in one of your answers, you said that what's happening now in the automobile sector are not to be taken lightly, these actions. So I'd like to get an understanding of why it is important to remain competitive now. Well, it's because it's an issue of, 125,000 jobs that are affected right now, that are threatened in the automobile sector. And one has to be able to get through this crisis because the economy, well, the manufacturing sector in Ontario is very important. I would say it's part of the backbone of our Canadian economy, and the automobile sector is very substantial within the manufacturing sector. It's 17 billion of revenue or of GDP in Canada per year. But I would also say that if the Ontario economy is not going well, the Quebec economy will not go well, nor that of the country. So that's why you have to be able to fight for those jobs. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, this brings to an end the questions for today. Thank you very much, Minister, for being here.
Reminder, officials will be sticking around for the second hour. So, colleagues, we're going to briefly suspend in order to allow everybody an opportunity to turn over and prepare for the second hour.
Okay, we're going to switch over to ethics, where we've got Cooper and Barrett going on the same topic as they've been studying, the Conflict of Interest Act. And then we'll take a break before question period. Oh, what am I doing here?
I believe that people like you need to have access to as much information as possible in order to flag any potential issues.
I have to turn this committee up.
Earlier, Ms. Mignolet, you were stating that not all information needs to be shared. Not everyone needs to know what is found in a blind trust, but do you believe that an independent person, so a person who is completely independent from the blind trust, should the commissioner know all of the information in order to judge whether or not there is an issue or a potential issue?
Si je comprends bien votre question,
If I understood your question correctly, this is at the heart of a blind trust. In Quebec, we receive the information from the trustee, so the relevant information to ensure that the rules are being followed. So there is information that is not shared with the trustee, but if there are issues, we will be able to flag them. But there is no contact between the trustee and those using the trust. So before making a decision, it shouldn't be a direct employee of the elected official to make a decision. It would be strange for that person to have to flag the issue to their employer, and then they might fear reprisals. And so there should be an independent person who flags a potential conflict. If I've understood correctly, if there are issues with the trust, it's when it is created. If I saw any issues, I would recommend implementing measures even though I don't have a screen. So I would recommend measures, and that there would be people that would be committed to stating whether or not somebody needed to recuse themselves. And Ms. Motherwell stated it as well. Some people may receive a blank page because they are not able to see what is in the document. Thank you very much, Commissioner and Mr. Hardy.
On time today. So we've got some great questions that are being asked with even greater responses. So that's why I've kind of allowed it to go on. Mr. Saini, you have 5 minutes, maybe more, maybe less. Depends on where we go. It's up, where you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioners. My question is to Ariana McNaught. You mentioned that trust and security are essential tools for the politician to do their job. Does those apply to your cabinet ministers and the premier, and how do they work?
Donc, au Québec, si je comprends bien votre question, au Québec...
If I understood correctly, in Quebec, ministers, including the premier, must put some interests into a blind trust or a blind mandate. And so that must be done. This applies to ministers and the premier. There are some business interests that are not necessarily in stocks, but there are businesses that... There are some cases where a blind trust cannot be used. A minister must give up those assets. You can let me know if I understood your question correctly.
Madam Motherwell, question to you. One of the things that have came quite a few times that the Prime Minister's staff, Chief of Staff, or the person who's responsible for Privy Council should not be managing the screen or the blind trust. Could you give your opinion on that? You have mentioned you don't see any problem, but this is a constant question that comes here. So I would like to hear your viewpoint, professional viewpoint on that matter.
Certainly. I think what I'm able to do is provide you with a description of what happens in Ontario, which is it is not administered by. So, and also to understand here that we're talking about two different things. Within as I understand it, within the federal environment, where we have a trust, and then there are sort of companion ethics screens that are implemented. And the question is about the implementation of those screens. In Ontario, as I indicated, there are 8 ministers with trusts. They do not have companion screens. Screens generally, for us, are employed for personal matters that would be separate from the trust. So the trust itself is dealing with the conflict that is identified through the members' Integrity Act on what are restricted assets. If a minister has those restricted assets, they go into the trust, and that effectively deals with the conflict. It takes it away by restricting the individual's access to and knowledge about what is contained in that trust. And so, as I understand it, within the federal context, the question is who should be effectively managing the screens that are in place. And as I say, within the Ontario context, the management of that is up to career public servants who are working in Cabinet Office.
Career public servants, who appoints them?
The government, but they are the most senior officials in Cabinet Office who are overseeing the screens.
So it will be the Premier, you say, the most senior guys, who will be appointing those people?
No, within the public service. So it's the Secretary of the Cabinet and people who serve her.
Thank you. Ms. Motherwell, you also mentioned that the screens in Ontario, and I could be wrong, I just want clarity, could be managed by their friends and family members?
No, they could be about a friend or a family member. So, for example, if you have a close family member who runs a business and that business is a significant stakeholder of the government, a screen could be put in place so that the individual member has absolutely no role and no knowledge of any government business that takes place with that business from the family member.
Okay. We have heard witnesses in the past that the Canadian ethic laws are one of the gold standards in the world, but there's always need for improvement. Could you suggest is there anything that we could take from Ontario, and same thing to Madam Magnat from Quebec legislation that will help to improve it better?
I'm at 5:30, so right now. So if you can give me like a 30-second response, both of you, each, that would take us to another minute, which would give us almost 7 minutes. Madame Mignolet, s'il vous plaît, pour 30 secondes.
Ms. Mignolet, you have 30 seconds. Just a brief response, please. I'm not sure that I understood the question in its entirety. I think it had to do with what is found in the Quebec and Ontario legislation that could be applied federally. I responded to this a bit earlier, so I will let Catherine respond now.
30 seconds of response.
Okay. start your stopwatch. Quite simply, I think one of the strong features of the Ontario regime is the fact that every member must meet with the commissioner, and these are 1-hour meetings. They are in-person meetings. And they're great because they establish a relationship. You have an opportunity to get to know each other, and therefore you end up with trust developed. It means that they will ask questions when they see a situation, and they're also alert to when to ask the question.
Wonderful. Thank you. 29 seconds. Good job. We've got 5 minutes for Mr. Barrett, Ms. Church, Mr. Theriault. Oh, sorry, Mr. Cooper. Go ahead, sir. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to ask some questions about sanctions. So I'll begin with Madame Mignolet. You referenced that you have the power to recommend 8 potential sanctions. What are they? Can you elaborate on the range of sanctions that you can recommend, having regard for the gravity of the breach?
Oui, alors les sanctions que je peux.
Yes. So for the sanctions that I can recommend, they are as follows: a reprimand, penalties, financial penalties, refunding a donation or hospitality, refunding illicit profits, refunding any kind of benefits for the time of the breach, suspending the right to sit at the National Assembly, and a suspension of any kind of benefit until they comply to the condition. They can lose their seat, and they can lose their status as a member of the Legislative Assembly. These are the 8 sanctions that we have in the Ethics Code that I can recommend. My goal is not to recommend a sanction. It truly depends on the situation. I have recommended reprimand. Sometimes it was accepted, sometimes not. I have also imposed financial penalties, so it truly is a case by case. It depends on whether it's a first offense as well. There are many considerations that are factored into my decision. But my goal is not to punish. I'm not sure if I responded to your question.
Have a fairly robust range of sanctions that you can recommend. I would note that that is in contrast to our Conflict of Interest Act. With respect to financial penalties, what sorts of penalties could you recommend? What would be the range?
Alors, à la différence j'ai peut-être un.
I can make recommendations, and it might seem significant, but I can't impose these amounts.
And that it's up to the Assembly, but what would be the range of penalties on a monetary basis that you could recommend?
Écoutez, je n'ai pas de.
It would depend on what I would deem to be relevant, so I can't give you any kind of number. It really depends on the case.
We dealing with a few $100s, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars? I'm just trying to get an understanding, because in our Conflict of Interest Act, the penalties are very minor on a financial basis, a monetary basis.
Oui, mais les sanctions qui sont dans.
In the Conflict of Interest Act, those sanctions are administrative for delays. I wouldn't be imposing penalties for delays in document production. In Quebec, I have to deal with 125 officials. And so I don't have to deal with those kinds of issues with delays in productions and declarations.
And then to Commissioner Motherwell, what sort of sanctions may you impose under the Members' Integrity Act?
Thank you. I think it's first important to understand what circumstances would lead to the ability to make a recommendation on penalty. And it must come as a result of an inquiry that I would have conducted, where I would have received a request from one member who believes that another member may have breached the Members' Integrity Act or Parliamentary Convention. So then after conducting that inquiry, which is incidentally filed with the Speaker of the Assembly and also published on the website, I can then, if I conclude that there should be a penalty, I have 4 options. I can recommend that no penalty be imposed. I can recommend that the member be reprimanded. I can recommend that the member's right to sit and vote in the Assembly be suspended for a certain period of time or until such time as certain conditions are met that I would set. Or I could recommend that a member's seat be declared vacant. There are no monetary penalties provided within the legislation. And of course, as you noted yourself, it is of course then either to be accepted and voted on by the Assembly or rejected as it sees fit.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper and commissioners. Ms. Church, 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Motherwell, just a couple of questions, probably pretty short, but can you describe, just coming back to the notion of a blind trust, and you mentioned that once a blind trust is established, it takes away the conflict, I think is what your testimony was. Who can be a trustee? What are, like, if someone is setting up a blind trust in the Ontario model, who can step in and provide that role as being a trustee?
The first element is that the trustee must be at arm's length from the member, and then I must interview the trustee. And so the member may propose an individual. We've certainly had circumstances where they've proposed a relative. And the relative may be professionally qualified in order to undertake that, but we have declined and said that doesn't meet, obviously, the arm's length test. Go back and please find somebody else. They will then come back with another individual. They can be from all different walks of life, but generally some of them are professional corporations that undertake trustee business as a natural part of their business, banks, that kind of thing. Or it could be an individual. It could be a CPA. It could be someone with that kind of background.
What sort of guidance does your office then provide to the entity or the individual that is stepping in as trustee?
Oh, we provide extensive guidance to them. We've developed a small portfolio of resources that we provide to them and make it very clear what the expectations are, and then of course there's the development of the trust agreement first. Mm-hmm. And generally what we find is that ministers will engage legal counsel, and so we do have some templates that we provide to them so they get an idea what the structure of this needs to look like. Then we receive that. We push it through our own legal counsel, and there's a little bit of discussion back and forth. Once we determine that the agreement is satisfactory, we will then, of course, be having those parallel conversations with the trustee, because essentially they can have an input into the agreement itself, but it's their responsibility then, in order to fulfill all the obligations, the requirements of the trust. There's different reporting structures. There's the understanding of exactly how these communications will work. And as I indicated, they're not permitted to speak with the minister. Right. All communications must run through me. So, for example, a very simple thing is that trustee must develop some documents in order for the minister to be able to submit their taxes once a year. And so any information that is provided to the minister for something simple like what kind of information do you need for completing your taxes, I must approve it. And I can tell you there are many times when I've received documents from trustees and determined that there is far too much information in this document, back it goes. We ask for information to be redacted. The document is revised, and then it meets our standards, and then we will provide it to the minister. If the minister has any questions, again, they come back through us.
Because I would assume that there are clear restrictions either in the agreement or in the advice that you provide to a prospective trustee that restricts them from communicating with the office holder in this case about the nature of the assets or any development of the assets in the trust.
That's stated very clearly.
Yeah. And likewise, are there restrictions on the public office holder in terms of directions that that individual may give to the trust at its creation?
At its creation?
Yeah. Like, in other words, the public office holder can't direct the trust. You can't direct the trustee on how to hold, sell, how to handle the assets.
No, as I said, any communication after the trust has been implemented at that point, any communication related to this, and they understand it. They understand this going in, but they understand that they're not going to be receiving their investment statements. They're just not going to see that information. But I'll give you an example. So sometimes there are situations where they're sending a kid off to school and they'd like to be able to tap those assets and perhaps pull a little money out. Again, that kind of request comes to this office first. We then relay the request to the trustee, and the trustee makes whatever needs to happen in order to release those funds.
And in Ontario, do you do what we do federally, which is have a disclosure of the assets prior to the trust being created?
Yes, full disclosure to me, to the commissioner.
And would you say, maybe to both of you, how would you characterize the use of trusts in recent years? More, less? Are we seeing more use of this as a tool for managing ethics and integrity?
It's entirely dependent on the assets that they have, that a minister has when they come into office. And so it will depend on who the people are and what their backgrounds are and what they hold. And so as a result, it's not sort of an environmental piece, or it's not as a result of, we see more trusts now because more people are investing in the market. It will really just depend on the nature of the individual's assets when they come in, what their background was.
Okay, we're over time. I know you asked Madame Mignolet the question as well. Entre 30 secondes, est-ce que tu peux répondre?
Would you respond to the question in 30 seconds or less, please? Just as Ms. Motherwell stated, it truly depends on the assets. The code is quite clear on what needs to be sent into a trust. It's very clear. And it depends on what the minister owns.
5 minutes.
Mr. Thériault, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. I would like to carry on my questions with Commissioner Mignolet. Earlier, you talked about the ethics screens, and you didn't see the need for daily surveillance, but between having daily surveillance or nothing at all and just waiting on a complaint, perhaps a middle ground can be found. I'm sure you'll agree with me that the supreme authority at the table of ministers is the Prime Minister. As soon as the Prime Minister exerts his power over ministers with the help of a clerk or a chief of staff, that's fine. But if we're dealing with the Prime Minister and his ability to recuse himself, I think that if we're applying a screen to the Prime Minister, the management of such a screen should be assessed, if not on a daily basis, at least frequently. Mr. Conacher from Democracy Watch brought our attention to the definition of Section 2 of the Conflict of Interest Act, where we speak of the personal interest and a decision that would have general impact. So he said it's great to recuse oneself, but the law wouldn't apply to 99% of decisions made by heads of the government. Would you not then say that with that highest position, we need the highest level of transparency? And there should be a way for these ethics screens to have an application that would be different for Prime Minister, for ministers, for members, and for public servants. There should be different approaches, and we should have a mechanism to ensure a minimum level of accountability. Chief of Staff is a subordinate, and so they might want to protect their Prime Minister. But that doesn't mean that for general impact decisions, the Prime Minister can be sheltered from an appearance of a conflict of interest. I would like to hear your comment on that. So having different application according to one's position and ensuring accountability without waiting for a complaint, and being a Prime Minister requires even more structure. There were a lot of aspects to your question. So regarding the application of the screens that would be different for ministers and MPs and the Prime Minister, I am not certain. I'm not sure that it would be more difficult to apply this to a chief of staff, or for a chief of staff to do this even though they work for government. There are roles that require following certain responsibilities, and ministers have these responsibilities as well and need to follow them. Most people act in good faith. I can't start by thinking that everyone is acting in bad faith. I, of course, can't wait for a complaint. I can initiate an investigation if I have information that leads me to thinking that I need to investigate, or if I think that the measures were not followed, well, then I can act. And I think that that is sufficient. I believe that my powers, according to the code, allow me to ensure that we can focus on the public's interest. But what do you think about the ability of a public office holder taking part in decisions that would have a beneficial impact on their assets or former company? Do you not believe that there needs to be better safeguards? You stated that you weren't certain that there needs to be different measures for a Prime Minister, but I'm convinced that there needs to be different measures. I know you hesitated, but I'm hoping that you'll be able to reflect on this further and we can discuss this at a later date. When we talk about that general interest, in Quebec the wording is different. What's important for us is that the personal interest cannot impact one's independent judgment. So it's not whether or not the law applies to a person, it's regarding the independence of one's judgment on making a decision. And that comes back to what you said. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. I don't believe we have any other questions.
And I hope you don't mind, members of the committee. I'm going to start with you, Commissioner Motherwell. We've had some witnesses who've come to committee who said effectively that blind trusts aren't really blind. As long as the designated public officer knows what's in those trusts, then obviously some of the decision making can affect especially on major policy announcements, the holdings within that blind trust. We've also had some other witnesses who've come before committee who've talked about the only way to avoid a conflict or the perception of a conflict is complete divestment of the assets in advance to assuming office. So for the two commissioners, I'm curious what your opinion is or would be of complete divestment as a means to gain public trust and public confidence that what is happening in some cases, the highest office of the land is not a conflict of interest based on those holdings. So I'm just curious about divestment, in your opinion.
We have had, so as I indicated, we have restricted assets for ministers. One of the things that's not restricted for ministers is broad-based mutual funds. And so we have had circumstances where a minister has come in and said, I think the easy thing is I don't want to go through all the trouble, the hassle, the expense of a trust. I don't want to put that on the public purse. And so what the individual has done is gone off and actually divested themselves and then put everything into broad-based mutual funds, which are then not a reportable asset. But I think what you're asking about is whether it should be a requirement that someone who goes into elected office should have to, and please correct me if I misunderstand the question, that they should have to sell their holdings and in order to gain the public trust.
Well, just to clarify, some of the witnesses have said that complete divestment of the assets before they enter or while they're in public office or before they enter public office, and then that the assets can then be administered within a true, what some people have said, a truly blind trust through and where they don't know where those where that money is actually being invested. I hope I clarified that. I don't think I did, but I hope you have a better understanding of what I'm saying here.
I do. Thank you. Okay. I think that it's an interesting policy point and certainly one that would, I think, require a great deal of discussion, because I think what you want to make this evidence-based. And so what you need also is to be making that decision based not on just supposition or suspicion that things are happening that people don't know about, but with actual evidence that things have taken place, that the trusts don't work. I have not seen evidence within my experience thus far that indicates that a trust does not work. I can tell you that, yes, the individual knows what's in the trust, and we're talking about trusts that are invested in investments as opposed to those that would involve a private business, for example. Obviously, if you have a car dealership, it goes into a trust. You always have the car dealership, even though you are then separated from actually running those operations. But if we're talking about those who have investments, they know what went in, but they don't know what happens. I see what happens, and I can tell you that trustees and the investment advisors do buy and sell. They trade, and so they will make changes to the holdings that the individual minister has no knowledge of. And so I would look for evidence in order to follow that policy option. I would look for obvious examples of where it is proven that the trust model, that trust framework, does not work.
Yeah, and I guess. The rationale is that as a public office holder would divest, that would be made liquid, and then it would be up to the trustee at that point to determine where those investments go without the knowledge of the designated public officer. That's sort of what we've been hearing from different witnesses. Commissioner Mignolet, on the issue of divestment, I'm curious as to what your opinion would be on that.
Je suis d'avis, comme la commission.
As stated, Commissioner Motherwell, there needs to be discussions had in Quebec. We can choose to divest and to not use a blind trust. I don't have any information that would lead me to believe that these trusts don't work. a blind trust is a starting point. It is one of the measures that can be used to ensure that there is no conflict of interest, no favoritism. There are many measures that can be used, and the code allows me to suggest other approaches to ensure compliance. So in Quebec, in my experience, I have never seen a case where it would be absolutely necessary. It's not a simple matter, but it is something that is good to think about. That said, in Quebec, I haven't seen any issues so far.
Merci, Commissaire.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And that we don't have any further questions from our members of Parliament. I want to thank you both for being here today. You've provided the committee with valuable information in its deliberation on this issue. Thank you both for taking more than enough time with the committee, and we really appreciate and value the work that you're doing in Quebec and in Ontario as well. Not having any other business, I am going to adjourn the meeting. Merci à tous.
Okay. That is it. Obviously, you can see why I didn't want to cover ethics over Joly, because I know they're studying a really good topic in ethics. But once they get some better witnesses in, like the CEO of Brookfield, who is the other one that was called the Privy Council office? There's gonna that'll be a really good meeting, and we'll cover that for sure. We are going to take a break until question period. We got about an hour and a half. There are some committees on in the afternoon, but I don't think anything's going to be that interesting. There's nothing really that spicy. So tomorrow's going to be a busy day with the budget. There's committees on as well, both in the morning and in the afternoon. So we'll be really busy tomorrow. So just a bit of a lighter day today, just the morning stream and the question period stream. But it's going to be a busy week overall in general. Budget week, we could see a confidence vote pass. We just need to see what the NDP is going to do. And yeah, who knows? Who knows what the week is going to entail for us? Before we go, always vibing. Thank you so much for joining the club. Cindy, thank you so much for the super sticker. Really appreciate you guys with the extra support here. And everybody for tuning in and watching. I will see you guys in an hour and a half. Cheers, guys. See you soon.